everyone, it's Thursday. So it's 2021 now. So 2020 is done. I know because I personally stayed up until midnight to make sure that it left, and 2021 is here. And what you might not know is that this year is the Chinese year of the lucky metal ox. So that is why the very first pattern of the year is going to be an ox. Okay, so just like last year, I'm going to start by sketching out the shapes that we'll need. Okay, so the first piece we're going to work on is actually the head. Now for the head, we actually start at the nose and we work backwards in rounds. So we'll be tackling the head first. Now, attached to the head, we're going to be creating a pair of ears. We'll be creating a horn, which we started at the tip and worked back towards the base, leaving this end open. We have a couple of little nostrils, and then for this nose ring, we're going to start at one end and we're going to chain along around to the other end. So that is part 2. We will then probably stop and attach all of the pieces together just so that we have a completed head to work from. Right, part 3 is the body. So the body is this little L shape, and we're just going to work it in rounds this way. So what we'll do is at this point, we'll be working all of our increases on one side of the piece, which will give us this sort of lump. So part 4, we'll be making some front legs and some back legs. The back legs are actually short and stumpy and the front legs are longer. And last but not least, we'll be making a tail. So I am going to include a little bit of wire in my tail just to give me that little bit of extra posability. It's completely optional, you do not need to do it. Okay, so that's our plan. Now, for tools and materials, what you're going to be needing is, first of all, some yarn. So I have pulled out a couple of carnival yarns here. They are 100% acrylic, they are 8-ply. So if I'll get into the habit of showing you guys the label again. So I have picked out a sort of a dark red and a yellow to do mine in, just because to me they're very sort of appropriately festive colours for the Chinese New Year, though of course it is a metal ox technically this year, so you could do a nice one in grey, or you can go with more realistic colours as well. I'm going to be using a red and a yellow. You are going to need some 21mm safety eyes. Mine are completely black. You can sort of go with what feels right for you or what you have on hand, so we're going to need a pair of those. You're going to require your pins and needles. You're going to need a pair of scissors. You're going to need some stuffing. I am going to be using a little wire for my tail, and this is just thin crafting wire, similar to what I've used in my videos previously. So a little bit of wire there. Now this yarn recommends using a 4mm hook. I like to size down with my hooks, as you might know by now. So I'll be using my trusty 3.5mm hook. As an added kind of experiment for this one here, I made my first attempt just using the yarn over technique. I'm going to try to yarn under for this example, and we'll be able to have a look at the end and see sort of if there is a real concrete difference between the two. Right, but that's it. Okay, let's get into it. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to start with the nose and work up kind of a square shape. We'll then be increasing the number of stitches in that square shape until we hit 30 stitches, which will then repeat for a couple of rounds. And at that point, we're going to stop and we're going to position the eyes. So like so many of my designs, we're going to start with a magic ring of 6. Okay, so there we are at the end of our 30 rows. So the top of the head is actually, if you count 5 stitches back, that is where the center of your head should be. Now that's not exact, so mine actually wants to sit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 or 8 stitches back as the center top of the head. So just let your just give it a squish squash and see how it wants to settle. Don't force it to be 1 stitch further over than it wants to be. Okay, so I'm just going to take a moment and position our eyes now. So I've got my 21mm black safety eyes here, and I actually want to insert them. So you can see here on the finished one, they are kind of in the side of the head. They have been indented a little bit on this guy because he's finished, but basically what we want to do is, having identified the top of the head, we want to put them kind of on the side, and we want to work them in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to 6 rows back from where our opening is, like so. Right, so these have been placed 6 rows in, and I've left 8 visible stitches between them, or thereabouts, just to give you some idea of the positioning of mine. You can wait a little later in the pattern so that you can stuff the head first if you'd like, but this is really the easiest point to insert those eyes and make sure those backs snap on correctly. Okay, so now we're just going to keep working to fill in this gap, and we're going to work 2 more rows to decrease down to about 18, and then we're going to stuff it firmly, and then we're going to close it all the way off. All right, so there is our little head. That's the sort of the base of this whole design. And that is part one complete. Now we will be indenting these eyes a little bit when we do assembly, so they will look a little bit more like that. But for now, they are bugging out and they are cute. So now we're going to move on to part two, which is to make some features to attach to the head. So we're going to start with the ears. So the ears are also made in, I'm making them in red, so making them in your body color. What we're going to do is a magic ring of 6, and then don't pull the loop. So as you can see, I'm not pulling the loop tight. I've just created my 6 stitches into it, and then I'm going to chain 1 and turn. I'm going to put an increase in this first stitch. Then I'm going to put 4 single crochet across and then an increase in the last stitch, bringing this row up to 8 stitches total. Just like that. And I'm going to work backwards and forwards, chaining 1 and turning at the start of each row. And then we're going to finish off. Leave a little bit of a tail so you can weave it through back to the base of the ear. Oh, well, I flubbed that pretty badly, didn't I? Make sure you cut the right end of the loop. Okay, so that is our ear. And now to finish this little ear off, what we're going to do is pull in that magic ring, and that gives us that ear shape. So that is the first ear. We need to make 2 of those, so make another one just the same. Just like that. So now we are going to move on and do the horns. So for my horns, I'm going to be using yellow, and I'm just going to start by chaining 2, just like that. So now in the second chain from the hook, so that first chain that we did, I'm going to put 3 single crochet. So I'm then going to work 2 single crochet and then an increase to get us up to 4 single crochet in the round. So the next row we're going to work 3 single crochet and then an increase to get us up to 5. All right, and now we're going to do 4 single crochet and an increase to get us up to 6. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to work 3 rounds of 6 single crochet each for 18 stitches in total. So now we're just going to continue increasing the same way we were for 3 more rows, just to get us up to 9 stitches around, and then we're going to finish off. So there we go, we've just completed the last row there, and I'm just going to finish that off. Okay, so there is our first little horn, and now you need another one just like it. Okay, so there are our horns. So the next thing in our item 2 is to make the nostrils. They are simply a magic ring of 6 single crochet. And then rather than slip stitching or continuing, we're going to do the 6 single crochet and then we're going to chain 1 and turn. And what we're going to do is actually work 6 back post single crochet. So the first stitch that we work is actually coming in from the side of the piece, up through that gap, just like that, and then working the stitch. So that's 1. And then we're going to do the same thing around each of the other posts. Okay, so that's 6. If your magic ring has worked its way loose the way mine has, just pull it tight again and finish off. So there is your finished nostril. So you'll see that it's got this ridge, it's got a little dip in there, and the back side of it is sitting fairly flat, and we're going to use these stitches here to sew it onto the face in a way that makes it sort of blend in a little bit more, which is why we've bothered to do sort of a second row there. So that ridge is our nostril, and once again you just need another one like that, so they will be going on our little face as a nose right there like that, and that little dip is going to be where we sort of insert the ring that goes through as well. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we've made all the pieces except for the nose ring. We're just going to assemble the head and then we'll make the nose ring because we'll know exactly how big to make it. So the first thing to do when assembling your head is that we're actually going to indent these eyes a little bit just because it gives the head a bit of a nicer shape and it makes the eyes sort of a little less bulbousy. So in order to do that, you're going to need a needle and a piece of yarn. Now you will have seen me do this in a number of videos now. Basically what I'm going to do is just do a little stitch in the inner corner of the first eye. That locks that yarn in place. And then I'm going to insert my needle all the way through to the same point on the other eye. Pull that yarn all the way through and then pull it in so that it's nice and tight so that those eyes are being held where I want them. I tend to over pull a little bit because it will loosen after we've locked it in place. And then just stitch again just to lock that in place. There we go. So just like that, your eyes are very easily indented. Some people fuss around with sort of tying knots and doing it on the inside of the piece. I find this just to be the fastest, easiest method. Okay, so next up are the nostrils we just created. So we'll get my supervisor in here. And you basically just want to attach those, where nostrils go at the end of the nose. Make sure that the loops of those external stitches are laying nice and flat. And when we stitch them on, I'm going to be very, very careful to always stitch through matching holes. So stitch through stitch is how I think of it. And you'll get a more polished look. So that's my little nose position. And I'm just going to sew that on now. So there we go. I have sewn those nostrils on. And you can see that by going stitch through stitch, you can almost barely tell that they're a separate piece. So there are our nostrils. And now I'm just going to pin the ears and the horns in place. All right, so there we are. I've attached the ears to the side of the head. So you'll see that they are sort of horizontal and they are even with the eyes. That's because we need to leave room for the horns on top. Now for the horns, you can do them out to the sides or you can do them sticking straight up. You should place them above the ears because that's just how cow anatomy works. All right, so I'm just going to pin those in place now and then I'm going to sew them on. So there we are. So I've attached the ears and the horns. And you saw me do the nostrils. So that is the head nearly finished. We just need to do the nose ring. So now that we know exactly how far apart our nostrils are, we know how long to make our chain. So our nose ring is just a tight chain that branches from here to here with a loop in it. So I'm just going to chain 12. And then you can see that that makes it the right length. Sort of fit from one nostril to the other with the right sort of ring curve to it. Yours might differ slightly from that based on sort of how wide apart or close together you've put your nostrils. Okay, so then to attach, what you do is you put a little stitch into each of these into the nostril and then you weave the tails in through in that same direction. I'm just going to do that now, just like that. So that is our head complete. So that's part one and part, oh, jeepers, I need to clean up a little bit. So that is part one and part two done. So we'll be moving on to part three now and making the body. So the body is started from the butt and we work up to about 36 single crochet around and then we repeat that 8 times, which gets us to this join here or this part here. We then start putting our increases just on one side of the body to grow this lump, and then the finish off will be here. So we're working the whole way across. We're not trying to curve up, we are just working straight. Okay, so at this point we have the butt all done and now we're just going to start adding our increases on one side only to build up the front part of the back. I really should do a little bit more anatomy before I start these things. To work up the lumpy bit, yeah, basically we're going to work up to 54 stitches now and then we'll be basically decreasing down and finishing off at the front. Okay, so the gap is down to 24 stitches around now and so I'm just going to stuff it firmly. So now we've finished off the body, we've finished off the head. That is part 3 done. So now we'll move on to part 4 where we'll be making a couple of legs. So we will start with front leg. So I'm going to start with a little yellow because he's got little yellow feet. And we're going to start with a magic ring of 6. So then we are going to put an increase in each stitch around, bringing us up to 12. Just like that. So now what we're going to do is we're going to back post 12 single crochet around. Now, back post refers to working around not the loops, but around the post of the stitch, and you want to be working from the back of the piece. Now, because I'm yarn undering, the back of my piece is actually the opposite side to the one I'm used to. So the back of the piece, I always have the tail poking out that side so that I can remember which side is which. We're just going to work around the post, and we're going to work 12 single crochet that way. So there is that, and you'll see that that gives us this really nice sort of hard corner, which helps us define the base of the foot from the side and when we're going to work up the leg. So if you don't like doing back post, it's not a problem. Just replace that whole row with single crochet instead. So just work it as normal through both the loops. It just does mean that your feet will have sort of a rounded nub to them instead of a nice sort of flat for the foot. Now, this is the most common part where I gain or lose a stitch. So what I'm going to do is count backwards from my hook. 1, 2, 3, 12. And that is how I identify the next stitch I'm going to work in. Sometimes this is 12 and sometimes this is 12, depending on where you put your first back post. So I always just count back from my hook once I'm finished back posting to make sure that I'm working in the right stitch and I'm not accidentally gaining or losing one. So in this stitch, I'm going to swap to my red. You will have seen me do this a number of times before. Just like that. So that's the first stitch in the next row, and then we are going to work 11 more around for 12 in total. Just like that. Now at this point I'm going to trim off the yellow because we no longer need it, and it just helps us work a little bit cleaner. Shorten that tail as well, get rid of that. Okay, so that is the base of our front leg, and we're going to work 8 rows just to build up a little bit of a leg. So there is the finished front leg. I'm just going to finish that off now. We're going to stuff it pretty firmly to the halfway point and then leave the top part fairly loose with room to move. And you're going to need another one just like it. Ta-da! So those are our front legs. You'll note that they have a slight angle backwards, so those will angle pointing forward. So that is the front of the leg and that is the back of the leg. It doesn't really matter, but that is how I like to do them. So you'll see that both of them sort of have that little slope. So just have them so that they are pointing forwards, and those are our front legs. So now to make the back legs, you actually make the little hoof, the little yellow hoof, exactly the same way as you did on the front leg. So I'm just going to do that now. All right, so there we go. I've worked up the foot, and now we're going to swap to the red and work 5 rows just to work up a very short, stumpy little foot. Okay, so there is the little back leg. As you can see, it is much, much smaller than the front legs. And now I'm just going to finish that off. And you are, of course, going to need another one of those as well. Now we have finished part 4. Before we make the tail, we're just going to stop and we're going to assemble the pieces that we have. So we've already assembled the head, which is a lot of the hard work done, honestly. We have the body. Now this is the top where we've got that protrusion, and that is the butt. The head gets attached at the top part of that bump. So it's important that we actually attach the head first, because then when we go to pin the legs on, we'll be able to tell if it balances correctly and if it's going to be able to stand up. If you do the legs first and then attach the head, he might end up front heavy and just topple straight over. So there we go. I like that angle for him. I've only pinned the top part of it. I'm just going to pin the bottom part as well and make sure I'm still happy. I don't always say it, but definitely always take your time pinning carefully, because it's so easy to sort of move pieces around when you're pinning them. It's really hard to unstitch something. So there we go. I really like that head position. He looks all kind of like perky and happy, ready to like attack the new year. So I'm just going to sew that on now. So there we go. Little tug test, and it is firmly attached. So now we are going to do the legs. All right, so as mentioned, they do slope, the front legs slope forward. For the back legs, they also have that same little slope. So first I'm going to just pin them loosely where I want them to go, and then we're going to finesse it a little bit. So okay, so loosely where I want them to be, but you can see that I've got one sticking out the looking very even or nice. So now I know I just need to move this one in and down a little bit. Okay, so having straightened out those front legs so that they sit with the head nice and center, and you'll see that they are running sort of in line with the length of the hump. I then moved the little back legs around to help balance them out, and he stands up very nicely. I haven't put weights in these feet, but like you've seen in the Scullicorn video, you can use the same glass beads in these as well if you are having balance issues. The good news is about these legs is because they don't become narrower, you can pop the beads in at this point if you are having problems. So now that I have decided that exactly where I want those 4 legs, I am just going to sew them all on. So there we go. All 4 legs are firmly attached. Now, I did put a little bit of stuffing in the back legs. I don't think I said that earlier, but just, yeah, you can stuff the back legs as well. So now we are just going to sit our little nugget to one side and we're going to make him his tail. Right, so for the first part of the tail, we're going to use red and we are going to be working from the tip down to the base. The base will be left open. So similar to the horns, we'll be starting with a chain 2. And then in the second chain from the hook, so that first chain that we did, we're going to put 3 single crochet. Just like that. So from there we are just going to work up basically a long sausage of about 15 rows. Now I am going to be putting wire in mine. You can make yours shorter if you don't want to use wire, just so that it hangs a little bit more naturally. If I pull out the dummy ball here. So this guy has wire in it, so I could get away with making a longer tail. You can cut yours off at about the halfway point if you don't want to use any wire, just so that it sits like a normal tail. So there is our tail, and now we're just going to make a little tuft for the end. So that works up super fast. Okay, so there's our 2 tail pieces, and what I'm going to do is, because I'm using a little bit of wire, I'm going to add that in now. As my desk slowly descends into chaos. So even though the wire is anchoring the tip of the tail on, I am going to still put a few stitches in there. If you're not using wire, you will have to sew the end on anyway. There we go, just like that. So now I'm going to just trim off the extra lengths of this wire. I do prefer to cut a longer piece than a shorter piece, just because if it's too short you can't lengthen it, but if it's too long you can shorten it. Just like that. So you'll see I've still left about 1 inch or 2 to 3 centimeters overage there, just so that they can then be inserted and help anchor that tail into the back of the ball. So that's it pinned on, and now I'm just going to finish sewing this on, and then we'll be back with the final piece. And there he is. Now you can use a little black yarn to stitch on a mouth, and you can use a little yellow yarn to sort of stitch on a few embellishments if you were so inclined. There is our base ox for the Chinese New Year. Now just to pull the other guy back in, because so for him I have sort of stitched on a few extra bits and pieces. I just want to say, like, this is yarn over and this is yarn under, and there is honestly no competition between the two. Even just a close-up of the heads there. And just a close-up of the heads there, you can just see, you can pick immediately which one looks more uniform, it looks better. I'm just going to have to yarn under in future, because the quality of the finished product is just so clearly superior. So if you guys want to see a video on what I mean by yarn over and yarn under, leave me a comment down below. And I will make that for you, because I can't believe how big of a difference that's made. It's a little bit slower, but it's totally worth it. Okay, so that's it for this week's video. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a go at making your own little lucky ox for the Chinese New Year, which I do realize isn't until February. If you enjoyed this video, please think about hitting the like button and the subscribe button, because that lets me know that I'm making the kinds of patterns you guys are interested in seeing. If there's anything in particular you'd like to see a pattern for, I have left a pinned comment down below for your suggestions. So have a look through there and vote and see if anybody's listed anything that you'd like to see as well. That'll just help me with a little bit of direction. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep making what I want to see. Other than that, I will see you next week with another pattern. Okay, bye.